welcome. I'm Donna Kosak, President of the Marine Technology Society, and on behalf of over 2,500 individual members and 106 corporate members, it's my honor to greet you and welcome you to this meeting. Beautiful Anchorage, Alaska, and this meeting here. This is an honor for me to be up here and kick off this working group. We're also, MTS is honored to be in partnership with the Interagency Working Group on Facilities and Infrastructure. And we look forward to being part of this long-term sustainable effort to educate the American public and Congress on the importance of conducting research at sea, on ships, and the advocate for federal oceanographic fleet. Thank you, Charlie Alexander. We got together and we're talking about this, trying to get it kicked off last year, but we've got it this year. And Lieutenant Commander Stephen Barry for your coordination on this important event. So, Stephen. We're honored today to be joined by Rear Admiral Michael McAllister, Commander of the U.S. Coast Guard 17 District in Juneau. Rear Admiral McAllister is responsible for Coast Guard operations throughout Alaska, which including in protecting life and property, enforcing federal laws and treaties, preserving living mineral resources, and promoting national security. Additionally, he equips operationally ready maritime forces to Coast Guard and Department of Defense commanders for Coast Guard, joint and interagency operations, both domestically and internationally. So Rear Admiral McAllister has held key operational assignments, including Deputy Director of Operations for Headquarters United States Northern Command, Commanding Officer of U.S. Coast Guard Sea Point SEAL and USCGC Key Largo, served as Chief Responsive Division at Coast Guard Activities New York, where he led maritime response and security operations following the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 in New York City, and Commander of Coast Guard Sector Charleston, South Carolina. Additionally, staff assignments include Construction Project Manager at Facilities Design and Construction Center Pacific in Seattle, Washington, as Executive Officer of Civil Engineering Unit Miami, Florida, and multiple staff roles at U.S. Coast Guard Headquarters in Washington, D.C. Admiral McAllister received a Bachelor's of Science degree in Civil Engineering from the U.S. Coast Guard Academy and a Master's of Science in Civil Engineering from the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, and Master's of Business Administration from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Please join me in welcoming Rear Admiral McAllister.
All right, how is everybody today? All right, good. This is a big venue. I have never seen screens quite this large. I could probably take my glasses off and see these fairly well. But so I'm going to try to set the stage a little bit here. I understand the sessions that follow will focus on a little bit more of the technical matters at hand, but I'm going to try to connect operations to research and technology. And I'll admit I'm going to tell some sea stories, and like all good sailors, I will ensure that at least 10% of those are true. But I'm also going to focus largely on the Arctic. And I realize that the breadth of things that the folks at this conference are thinking about are much broader than that, global in nature. But the Arctic is still, to us, interesting and new. There's still a lot of challenges there. And it's one of my focus areas as the commander of Coast Guard forces in Alaska. And so I'm going to use the Arctic to describe some of the operational challenges that we have and the ongoing needs for research, technology, and other things to allow us to carry out our missions. And the reason why it's good that the screens are so big is because, believe it or not, this title slide, I think, has the second most words on it of any of my slides. There's a lot of photos here, and so I won't ask you to read much. And let's get started here. So I figured I'd give you just one or two kind of introductory remarks and slides about the 17th Coast Guard District. What is that? And that'll set the context for some of my other comments. We really try to provide safety, security, and stewardship of the maritime domain from the kind of the middle of the Pacific Ocean all the way to the North Pole, and from just off of Japan to the United States. And so the area that you see, surrounded there is the area that I get to oversee. We, the Coast Guard, have assets really in every corner of this area. So as an example, today I have a Coast Guard ship off of Japan working with international partners to enforce treaties that we've agreed to amongst Northern Pacific countries on combating illegal, underreported, and unregulated fisheries. I've got ships on the U.S. border with Canada down by the Dixon Entrance. So this is Alaska's southern border with Canada, doing oil spill exercises. And I'll give you a little bit greater detail about where I press my resources northward into the U.S. Arctic in a cooperative sense there as well. But as you might imagine, your United States Coast Guard is the leader in terms of federal, state, local agencies in providing an effective on-water presence in the U.S. Arctic. So here's just a quick graphic on where we have Coast Guard forces currently stationed in Alaska. This shows just the permanently assigned forces. We also are the beneficiary of a lot of deployable resources. Those are resources that come from places like San Francisco and Seattle. They may be what we call high-endurance cutters that are multi-mission ships. They may be icebreakers. They may be buoy tenders. So this graphic simply shows the permanently assigned forces. But let me ask you, what do you notice about where my forces are assigned? I'm sorry? Gulf of Alaska, yeah. They are assigned largely in the population centers of Alaska. My work is more and more so with each passing year, not necessarily centered around the population centers of Alaska. In fact, today, as an example, I have ships in the Bering Sea literally 365 days a year enforcing fisheries rules there, doing search and rescue, and I don't necessarily have permanently assigned resources there. We'll talk more about the Arctic and the challenges of having infrastructure in the Arctic to home port vessels there. But we employ in the Coast Guard very much what we call a mobile seasonal approach. And what that means is when there is little to no ice that would impede the advance of my forces northward, that's when I push forward resources to be able to do all the Coast Guard missions. And then when the ice comes back, I use those resources elsewhere in my area of responsibility or anywhere that the Coast Guard operates. So let me tell you just a little bit about some of the Coast Guard missions that we do. And I think the interesting thing here is that the Arctic now demands that we conduct all of our Coast Guard missions that you would find pretty much anywhere else around the globe, certainly around the country. So and we generally split our missions into two different kind of worlds. One is we try to prevent bad things from happening, and on those occasions when bad things do happen, despite our best prevention efforts, we need to be able to respond. So the things that are included in prevention include commercial vessel inspections. Now those could be commercial vessels that are U.S. flag vessels or flagged under foreign nations, investigations of incidents on board regulated vessels, aids to navigation, vessel traffic services, recreational boating safety, trying to keep people safe on small vessels, ice breaking, both domestic and international. And so those are things we do to prevent bad things from happening in the first place. When on the response side, those include things like search and rescue, law enforcement, border security, which may involve drug interdiction, may involve migrant interdiction, oil and chemical spill response, what we call living marine resources or enforcing fisheries rules in federal waters, ports and waterways, coastal defense, or coastal security and defense, and I'll get into those in a little bit more detail. So let's talk a little bit about the Arctic. And you can talk about the Arctic in many ways. I suspect we have a fairly diverse audience here that thinks about the Arctic challenges in many different ways. Could be climate change, could be thawing permafrost, could be coastal erosion, could be sea level rise. And, you know, the politics aside, we, the Coast Guard, look at it from a very pragmatic view. Melting ice to us is an opening ocean. And what you're going to see as a result of opening ocean is increased traffic. And it's not just the fact that there's less ice, but it's different ice as well. It's far more, first-year ice, which is thinner and easier to access than we used to have in the past, far less multi-year ice, which is frankly a significant challenge, even with the best of equipment in terms of icebreakers and other capabilities. So let me talk a little bit about some of the implications that we see of an opening ocean and more maritime activity. And I would offer to you some of these increases in activity are high-risk activities. And to some extent, some of that risk is created as a result of significant uncertainty as a result of changing weather patterns, changing amount of ice, and so forth. So I'm going to point to some of the photos here, or I'm going to kind of work you around the clock here. So in the upper left-hand corner is the cruise ship Crystal Serenity. So if you're here in Alaska, you probably have seen in the news the Crystal Serenity just completed her second successful voyage, sailing from Seward here in Alaska to New York City. She carries about 1,700 passengers and crew on board. In case you're interested in this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, the cheap cabins are $22,000 per person. The really expensive ones that come with extra amenities are about $120,000 per person. We're hoping that this is anomalous activity in terms of cruise ships, but we have to be prepared in the event that the Northwest Pass becomes an even more popular destination for cruise travelers. And I'll talk a little bit about the Crystal Serenity in terms of search and rescue in just a few moments here. A lot of research vessels, which hopefully some of you are familiar with. I was looking just the other day, so the Coast Guard, of course, keeps track of vessels throughout the Arctic, but in particular in our exclusive economic zone where we control our resources, or at least attempt to control our resources. We had research vessels in our EEZ from Korea, from Japan, from the U.S. We had military vessels from Canada. We had commercial vessels from France. Not too far outside our EEZ, we had research vessels from China, from Russia. There's a lot of research activity going on in and around our EEZ. And a lot of that is great activity. But there's also a challenge there in making sure that the U.S. is able to lead and coordinate the science that goes on in our exclusive economic zone and is the beneficiary of that activity. In the upper right-hand corner, believe it or not, that is a sailboat that got stuck in the ice well north of Barrow, Alaska, and called the Coast Guard. I think it was about 300 miles north of Barrow. We call those adventure tourists. That's quite an adventure to go get stuck in the ice, many hundreds of miles from the nearest Coast Guard facility. Fortunately, our icebreaker was in the vicinity. It was able to go tow them to open water. But that's the kind of high-risk activity that we're seeing on an everyday basis now in the Arctic. Some other interesting things. So in the middle on the left is one of the vessels of the new class that the Russians are building to move LNG from central Russia through the Bering Strait. And what do you notice about that picture? Somebody might have said it's going backwards. So that particular class can break ice both forwards and backwards, doesn't need an icebreaker escort. And I anticipate that those LNG ships will be shipping year-round here. If not this coming year, then certainly within the next few years, they're equipped to do that. And so, it's just a sign of how serious Russia is in terms of developing from an economic standpoint their Arctic resources. That picture right in the middle is, believe it or not, is a gold dredge. So you may have seen on TV, there's a whole series on, I think it's called Bering Sea Gold. A lot of interesting Alaska characters on that show. I will not vouch for whether that's accurate depiction of some of the drama that goes on in Alaska, but it is an accurate activity. That vessel contraption harvests gold off the bottom of the ocean off of Nome, Alaska. And it's a challenge to try to regulate all of the new uses of Arctic waters. The ship just to the right is a member of the class of Chinese intelligence ships. It was, widely reported that there was an intelligence ship off of Kodiak recently, and that's not the only military activity that goes on here amongst nations that are not necessarily allied from a military standpoint with the U.S. There have been Chinese surface action groups, Russian military buildup in their Arctic waters. And so from a sovereignty or defense standpoint, the Arctic is an area of increased activity. Lower left-hand corner, subsistence activity is absolutely impacted by the change in the environment. In fact, we recently had 2 search and rescue cases at the beginning of this summer. I normally push helicopters northward to do search and rescue around the 1st of July through the summer. We had 2 cases in June this year. We had all involving Alaskan Native community members. One was 2 gentlemen who went out in a 10-foot rowboat, got separated from shore. They ended up getting caught in ice. The ice was drifting offshore to the north and west, and because we were so far away, literally 650 miles away, by the time we got there, they were no longer where they were reported to be, and we searched for about 3 days and couldn't find those gentlemen. And so, even the folks who know the ice well find the conditions to be so uncertain that they're engaging in activities that are suddenly much higher risk to them. And then the other case that we had was a 22-foot skiff, a common type of vessel used by many of the local communities in Alaska. 2 gentlemen had been ejected from the vessel just traveling along the coastline, and could very well have been caused by ice in the area, and both of those gentlemen were found deceased. So it just, again, demonstrates that things are changing, and there's a great amount of uncertainty out there now. Oil exploration, while decreasing certainly in the last couple of years, is one of those things that caused the first, significant increase in Arctic interest and activity levels. And with the administration change and discussion about potential for reopening Arctic waters to oil and gas exploration, we could and may well likely see increased activity there in the future. And then lastly, I'll mention lower right-hand corner, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing is now a global problem. The U.S. Coast Guard actually coordinates our fisheries enforcement efforts with our Russian counterparts almost on a daily basis. And that activity appears to be migrating northward, and I'll show you a slide demonstrating where that activity occurs now. And there's currently a voluntary moratorium on fishing activity throughout the Arctic, but the people who commit illegal fishing don't care about voluntary moratoriums, and I think it's just a short amount of time before we're asked to patrol Arctic waters to enforce treaties or moratoriums on fisheries activity. So let me give you a little bit of data. Here's the Arctic traffic picture. It's been steadily increasing year over year. It has gone up 140% in the years from 2008 to 2016, and it's gone up in a variety of different categories, including cargo vessels, tugs and barges, tank vessels, which are typically carrying petroleum products, research vessels, government vessels, and cruise ships. Maybe not so much in the number of cruise ships that has increased, but really in the capacity of those cruise ships. Here's another view of Arctic traffic, both a line drawing and a heat map. And I'll point out a couple of things here. So this is from 2014 to 2015. At the bottom of the heat map, you can see the Great Circle route traffic. So if you're not familiar with what a Great Circle route is, believe it or not, the shortest distance on the globe between a place like San Francisco and many ports in the Far East is a line that goes through the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. And so we get about 5,000 ships of flagged, by many different nations. That it's essentially a superhighway for large commercial carriers. Just north of that are some of the best managed and most productive fishing grounds in the world in the Bering Sea. And you can see the activity levels there. And then way up in the upper right-hand corner of that heat map is the Chukchi Sea, and that was the 2014-15 gas and oil and gas exploration activity done by Shell. So some of the other things you see here, there's some obvious routes between locations, but there's also a lot of kind of helter-skelter, people kind of going everywhere. And so that makes it tough for us to identify safe routes for shipping. And I'll talk about an effort that we're engaged with across a lot of organizations to try to identify the safest potential routes. But if you think that the ocean bottom in the U.S. Arctic, less than 10% has been mapped to current standards, and yet people are using pretty much the entire U.S. Arctic, it's a little bit scary in terms of the risk that presents to our nation. So those are that's kind of the environment that we face. And from a Coast Guard perspective, I'm going to separate our response. We had a strategic response, and we had an operational response. Our strategic response, essentially was putting together a Coast Guard Arctic strategy, and because there was no national strategy at the time, we actually helped the White House put out the national strategy and then followed it just a few days later with our own strategy. There have been others since then. I know NOAA has a Arctic Action Plan. DoD has a strategy which they've recently updated. And then we put together an implementation plan. I'm going to hit on a few of the items that come out of that implementation plan. But there's things that are being done at the global level, things like setting up an Arctic Coast Guard Forum. So the Coast Guards of the 8 Arctic nations come together and conduct joint exercises, do joint research. Polar Code implementation, the U.S. led the effort to both establish and now implement the Polar Code. We've established a Center for Arctic Study and Policy at our Coast Guard Academy. And, of course, we provide support to the Arctic Council, primarily in the form of exercises amongst nations in maritime activities like search and rescue. What I focus mostly on is what I'll call an operational response. So what the heck are we doing on the water or on land to address these increased activity levels? So I run an annual operation, which we call Arctic Shield. And we're in our 8th year of that operation. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, I push assets north. I'll warn you that even though I show cutters and aircraft up there, this map is not to scale. As you all know, Alaska is a huge state. And even with all the assets you see here, the Coast Guard ships, the aircraft, icebreakers, buoy tenders, there's a lot of uncovered territory still. On the water, we do things like carry out search and rescue cases. Last year, as an example, we had 26 search and rescue cases during the summertime above the Arctic Circle that we carried out. We do law enforcement, fisheries enforcement. We provide really the nation's most visible sovereign presence. I know because I talk with Navy leaders fairly frequently that they provide a presence as well, primarily on undersea and in the air presence, but it's not as visible. And if you don't have a visible presence, it's hard to make that an effective presence. And it's not necessarily able to address the full range of threats because your Department of Defense is equipped to really defend the country against the most extreme threats to national security, and sometimes threats don't manifest themselves in ways that are so obvious as a gray warship that is violating your sovereignty. On land, also add on water, we provide science support primarily through our medium class icebreaker, the Healy. On land, we do inspections of commercial vessels, of facilities. We do drills and exercises. We do mass rescue planning, and I'll talk a little bit about that more in just a moment. And we do a lot of training with Alaska Native communities, things like cold water survival training, mass rescue training, ice rescue training, trying to build the capacity of Alaska Native communities to be first responders. And that is a role that they have to continue to develop over time. Being there helps us to identify gaps in our knowledge and our capabilities that really drives research. And so that's one of the greatest values we get out of pressing our assets north. Just as an aside, we had an opportunity this year to send a Coast Guard cutter through the Northwest Pass. So one of my buoy tenders, normally homeported in Sitka in southeast Alaska, we had to send her to Baltimore to get some work done. And we had a choice. We could have sent her south through the Panama Canal or north through the Northwest Pass. Being in Alaska, really it was an easy choice for us. We sent her north. And she's the first Coast Guard buoy tender to make that transit in 60 years. It was 3 Coast Guard buoy tenders and a Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker that were the first U.S. Vessels to make the Northwest Pass, and it was almost exactly 60 years ago from this summer when we sent another one through. And it was actually fairly easy sailing for them. There was one area where they got Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker assistance in Victoria Strait, which is notoriously kind of a choke point for ice. But other than that, it was clear sailing. Again, just a sign of the times. So I often get asked, what are the major challenges you face? What are the things that keep you awake at night? And other than my 2 teenage sons who are both now in college, these are the things that keep me up at night. And there's a lot of them. But the good news is that presents plenty of opportunities for us in terms of research and in terms of closing operational capability gaps moving forward. And so I'm going to describe a couple of these in terms of those various missions that we do in the Arctic. So let me start with search and rescue. I mentioned the Crystal Serenity voyage. If you look at those 3 photographs across the top, those are pictures from their voyage. I find that one in the upper left-hand corner fascinating. So here's a Canadian community of about 300 people entertaining almost 1,700, about 1,000 passengers on board this cruise ship. And I got to say, Crystal Cruise Lines did a remarkable job with their logistics. What they did is they allowed people to come ashore in small groups, and as soon as they were done, they'd go out, get the next small group, and so it didn't overwhelm the communities. And the communities are, by and large, very practical about the impacts of cruise lines. They enjoy the opportunity for the economic development, but these cruises have to be managed in a way where they're not going to impact the environment. In this case, Crystal, in that center picture you can see, they actually leased a British icebreaker or a ice support vessel to ensure that their voyage was safe. It brought extra oil spill response equipment. It brought extra sensors. It brought extra boats and helicopters so that people could get off the ship, both to do tourist type activities, to go see polar bears, but also in a case of an emergency to get off the ship safely. A couple of the other photos that you see here. So on the lower left-hand corner is a fish processor vessel called the Alaska Juris. This is some of the challenges we're going to have in search and rescue in the Arctic. This was actually in the Bering Sea. We got an emergency notification that they were abandoning ship. The ship was taking on water. 46 people on board. They were able to get everybody safely into life rafts, but that's pretty scary when you're 1,000 miles from the nearest Coast Guard facility. We were able to use AIS, automated identification systems, to identify other Good Samaritan vessels in the area, 2 fishing vessels and 2 commercial vessels, big tank ships, and asked them to respond. And in about 3 hours, they were able to make it on scene and safely recover all 46 people out of those life rafts. One thing that we find in the Arctic is that Good Samaritans, people who sail in the Arctic, are going to be very much a part of the network that we have to carry out all of our rescue missions here moving forward, because there's simply not enough rescue assets in place to do it on our own. That vessel in the middle is the fishing vessel Destination. It's a Bering Sea crabber. It overturned here in February of this year with the loss of 6 people. It was one of the most significant commercial fishing vessel fatality cases that we've had in 15 years. And but we knew exactly where to go to begin our search because, again, we used a AIS in this case, and we could track the last few moments of that vessel's voyage. And so we took the search part out of this. Unfortunately, it looks like the ship went down very quickly. We were not able to recover anybody out of the ship, but we knew exactly where to search. And on the right-hand side, I realize it's a little bit hard to see, but again, getting back to this point of the uncertainty created by changing environmental conditions, there were 2 walrus skiffs out of Shishmaref that went out, and the ice shifted on them. They got caught in the ice and ended up calling the Coast Guard. That was about 700 miles away from our nearest Coast Guard location, but we, through the use of 2 helicopters and 2 C-130, long-range search and rescue helicopters, we were able to go out and pick them up about 8 hours after they called us. That was as fast as we could get there to rescue them out of the ice. So again, even experienced sailors are challenged in these conditions. What do I take away from that in terms of the research demands? Certainly what we call maritime domain awareness is near the top of our list in terms of our needed capabilities. Things like vessel tracking, information on vessels, crew, cargo, intentions, pollution detection, and trajectory or tracking or trajectory predictions, awareness of what's going on with fisheries and marine mammals so that we can help deconflict the commercial recreational activity with the natural patterns, movement patterns of particularly marine mammals. And then our solution set kind of follows along the same lines with improved intelligence capability. One of the things about AIS, which we use on a daily basis, is you can turn it off. If you're on the bridge of a ship, you can turn off your AIS. And it makes it much harder for us to see you. It's not to say that we can't, but it makes it much harder for us to see you, and it makes it harder for us to share with all of the other stakeholders that are interested in an activity, where you are and what you're doing. So we need to expand our ability to track not only large ships that are required to carry AIS, but small vessels as well. The Arctic is ripe for unmanned vehicles, undersea, unmanned air vehicles as well, but I got to tell you, weather is a real challenge for us in terms of the technology that those unmanned systems typically use. And then, the ability to place sensors and the ability to power and maintain sensors in remote locations is included as well. So let me get back to the Crystal Serenity. One of the things that we did in preparation for a large cruise ship going through the Arctic is we did an exercise. And these are photos from the exercise that we conducted. It was jointly sponsored by the Department of Defense and the U.S. Coast Guard. The Department of Defense brings amazing capability when you can get it, when you have to work at great distances from your home base. And so the scenario was 250 people on a smaller cruise ship where they had to evacuate the cruise ship because of a fire. And they were about 10 miles offshore. And so first we had to get them ashore. And then when they were ashore, they were still 300 miles from the nearest small town. So how do you provide first aid? How do you move those people to that small town? That particular small town had a clinic with 8 beds in it. 250 people are going to easily overwhelm that small town, and so how do you provide, kind of the triage that you need to provide there, and then move people to a place like Anchorage, which is going to be able to provide a higher level of medical care. And so you can see, a lot of helicopters. DoD actually owns what they call Arctic sustainment packages, so they can drop vehicles, tents, pararescuemen out the back of a C-130 or C-17, and they'll set up essentially a MASH capability on a beach and get people out of the weather and provide them first aid. The state provided, again, a MASH level type of capability in Kotzebue, which was the town we used to, it's kind of that intermediate level of care. And then the cruise line itself picks it up from there and establishes kind of a rotating, a conveyor belt of commercial aircraft to be able to move people on to wherever they need to go. I can tell you, because we only ended up using about 25 role players, this was really hard with 25 people. Imagine trying to do it with 1,700 people like was on the Crystal Serenity. And so those are the challenges we continue to face. And logistics is important in all of our missions, but particularly in search and rescue. Getting access to remote locations, dealing with the weather, dealing with the fact that you have no infrastructure to work with, so the idea of medical care and power and all those other things. And then providing support for responders. So we just went through, we're in the middle of our third major hurricane here in the U.S. Today. And one of the big lessons learned out of Hurricane Harvey in Texas was the responders were impacted just as much as everybody else. Their houses were flooded. All of the Coast Guard buildings were flooded and unusable. And so just providing berthing and messing and all those other, basic needs to Coast Guard responders was a real challenge. They were out there saving, there was a total of about 11,000 people saved in in Hurricane Harvey. They need to be supported while they're doing that. And it's much harder in the Arctic than it is in the Houston-Galveston area. Let me talk a little bit about oil spill prevention and response. And I'll use a couple of these photos to tell the story as well. So lower left-hand corner is a tank vessel called the Champion Ebony. So this was my introduction to my new job in Alaska last year. I was in my second full week. I was feeling good as the new commander, and then I was up in Kotzebue dedicating a new hangar that we were going to use there, and I got the word that a tank ship with 14 million gallons of diesel fuel on board had just run aground south of Nunivak Island in the Bering Sea. It ran aground. It draws about 33 feet. It ran aground in an area where the chartered depth was 54 feet. We'll talk a little bit about bottom mapping here. Now, fortunately, this particular tanker had a double hull, and so the damage that was done to the outer hull did not result in an oil spill. But these are the types of things that are happening day in and day out in the U.S. Arctic that just, again, describe the challenge that we face. The lower right-hand corner is a ship called the Selendang IU, which grounded and broke in half just north of Unimak Island back in 2004, I believe. She wasn't even carrying oil. She's carrying soybeans. But she was carrying 425,000 gallons of bunker fuel just to make the motors run. And that created a very significant environmental impact just from the ship's fuel on board. And then the center photo, does anybody recognize that? Jim, I know Jim recognizes that. So that's a satellite photo of Deepwater Horizon. And I'm pretty confident that there won't be a Deepwater Horizon type of event in the Arctic. It's completely different in terms of oil extraction technologies and challenges. But the thing about the Arctic is you are so far from anywhere, and there's so little infrastructure to deal with that even a much, much smaller spill is going to have outsized impacts. And the pristine environment here. So, even going back to Deepwater Horizon, there is no better place, probably on the planet, but certainly in the U.S., that is better capable or prepared to respond to large oil spills than the industry-intensive area of the Gulf of Mexico. We don't have that in the Arctic, and so again, any small spill is going to be a real significant challenge for us. So oil spill response technologies is a significant need in terms of removing oil from ice and snow. The chemistry and use of dispersants is going to be a big issue for us. About 70% of Alaska Native communities rely on the sea for most of their dietary needs. And if you think about the concerns that people have over the impacts of oil spills and the use of dispersants, which essentially just takes an oil spill and breaks it down to its smallest individual components and spreads it out, that creates significant concern amongst those communities that rely on marine mammals and seafood. And in situ birding, or the burning of oil, is a real challenge in the cold water environment as well. Let me also mention hydrography. So we were debating a little bit earlier before I came up here about how much of the Arctic is currently charted or is charted to modern standards. And it's a very small percentage. I think we can all agree on that. And I think the NOAA has said in the past that it'll take about 25 years at the current rate to bring the U.S. Arctic, at least the heavily trafficked areas, up to modern standards, which I don't think tells the full story because of two things. One is the bottom is constantly changing. It changes much faster than the 25-year cycle that we're currently on in terms of being able to update our charts. And the technology is changing, and the demand for accuracy is changing, and so the technology is also changing much faster than that 25-year life cycle of our current capability. And so we do need more capacity to carry out these surveys. We need limited, and we currently have limited tide and current data, which impacts our ability to plan for search and rescue, oil spill response, and so forth. And even with the best capabilities of NOAA, the Coast Guard, crowdsourcing, and other means of getting bottom data, we are behind and probably falling further behind. So let me talk a little bit about managing waterways. That photograph on the left side is something we are in the process of submitting to the International Maritime Organization. We called it the Port Access Route Study. So what we tried to do was, I showed you that heat map and that line map earlier that demonstrated where ships currently travel to get through the Bering Sea and the Bering Strait. So we took that one kind of right up the middle and we said, okay, well, we're going to put a track here. We're going to make this a recommended track. We're going to work with NOAA. We're going to survey that track. It's about 4 miles wide, about 700 miles long. And we're going to say, ships, if you use this track, because it's surveyed, we think that you're going to be safe here. And because part of that track, or one of the legs of that track, goes into Russian waters, we're currently working with the Russians to do a joint submission to the International Maritime Organization. But to be honest with you, we haven't seen, and we put this out. We the Coast Guard, published it. We made it a voluntary recommended set of recommended tracks. We haven't seen a significant change in behavior yet. I think it's going to take approval through the IMO, and I think it's going to take some other incentives like insurance companies paying attention to where ships go and don't go to kind of force those who sail Arctic waters to stay in areas where we know that they're more likely to be safe. The photograph in the bottom middle, that's the tank ship Renda. So that's a Russian-flagged ship carrying diesel and heating oil, which a few years ago couldn't make it all the way into Nome because ice came early. They called on the Coast Guard. At the time, the Coast Guard had one icebreaker, period. And fortunately, that icebreaker was available. They were only a couple thousand miles away. We came and we escorted that vessel through about 300 miles of ice to get to Nome so that they had heating oil for the winter time. But again, that uncertainty is creating havoc on at least on scheduled routes for commercial activity. So how does this translate into research needs? Certainly environmental predictions, ice prediction being a significant one. Icebreakers, they don't just ram into ice and just keep moving forward like that. They actually look for thin ice, they look for ice leads, and we can't do that effectively without good ice predictions. And believe it or not, I was at the National Ice Center a couple of weeks ago, and I asked them, how good is your forecast? They said, well, we think we can forecast out to about 24 hours. I said, okay, can you forecast out to about 3 months? Because that's really what my need is. At least give me a couple of weeks, because you don't move any assets in the Arctic without at least a week's notice because of the great distances involved. Tide and current predictions, weather predictions, again, are all important for our missions. I am pleased to say, from an icebreaking perspective, many of you have probably followed the congressional interest. Russia has 41 icebreakers. They're building 5 more. You're seeing, with that one icebreaker there, half the U.S. icebreaking fleet. We have 2. But we have some money from Congress to begin design of a replacement for our oldest icebreaker. We've set a program of record of 6, and so far there seems to be interest in moving that program forward. What do icebreakers give you? They give you science support. They give you the ability to carry out Coast Guard missions, search and rescue, oil spill response in ice-covered waters. They also give you that effective presence to establish sovereignty in your exclusive economic zone and your territorial seas when you need it. And then I think the last mission area that I'll talk about is protecting living marine resources. So I mentioned earlier illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing is a global problem. The Russians came to us and said, hey, can you help us enforce our own, enforce legal fishing in Russian waters? And we have helped them do that. We haven't actually gone into Russian waters, but the vessels that fish illegally in Russian waters typically come out and transit through U.S. waters in order to get to Russian waters. And that gives us, the United States Coast Guard, the ability to conduct boardings and to help Russia enforce their laws. In fact, there was a case recently where we helped identify a vessel that the Russians suspected was illegally engaged in crab fishing in Russian waters. We told the Russians where to go find it. They boarded it, seized 30 tons of illegal crab on board, returned the crab to the sea. And I don't know what happened to the captain and crew, but I'm sure the Russians took their own brand of enforcement action there, which is probably pretty effective. As you can see, so what you're seeing is an AIS shot. So green vessels are U.S. flag vessels, orange vessels are Russian or other nation flag vessels. You can see this is already happening in Arctic waters, at least the definition that we use with the Arctic Council. And I fully suspect that that's going to continue to migrate north as ocean temperatures continue to rise. And there is an active fishery already in Arctic waters. The state of Alaska has an active commercial salmon fishery that's not covered under the moratorium. And so a place like Kotzebue, as an example, there's about 400,000 pounds of salmon landed every year through that commercial fishery. It just demonstrates the viability of commercial fishing in the Arctic moving forward. And then there's a number of what I'll call enabling capabilities that are important to us as well from a research and a technology perspective. Things like communications, which are really, really hard in the high northern latitudes. Data exchange, and by that I mean, I have to communicate with my own assets, but I also have to communicate with all the other maritime stakeholders out there. Those might be captains of vessels, those might be Alaska Native communities that are about to receive a research vessel that's going to be in their waters that they typically use for whaling. There's a variety of folks who are interested in what's going on out there, but I can't communicate very well with them right now. And so we need to continue to focus on communications. And it has to be a broad spectrum of capabilities. I have brand new national security cutters. These are the most high-tech, brand new Coast Guard ships. I might communicate with them differently than I communicate with a 23-foot open skiff that has a couple of walrus hunters in it. But I need to communicate with both, and so that's the breadth of the challenge here. And I want to be able to provide data so that everybody's participating in maritime domain awareness, so that if somebody sees something which they don't correspond to, an AIS hit on their AIS display, they can say, I wonder why that guy's not transmitting on AIS. I should call the Coast Guard and tell them. But we don't really have that broad capability at this point. And then there's a whole bunch of policy, international, domestic policy, governance structures that need to be set up to continue to make sure that the Arctic is a place of cooperation rather than conflict. Things like the Arctic Coast Guard Forum, forums that bring together tribal interests to meet with maritime industry interests so that we can resolve conflicts ahead of time, local capacity building to be first responders and those sorts of things. I'll note, because I have a member from the Coast Guard in District 13 that I think works with the Coast Guard cutter Healy. That picture in the bottom middle is a device that's designed to retrieve oil out of ice-choked waters. Great. I was able to see this myself on the back of the Coast Guard cutter Healy being tested this summer. Great capability. It evidently works. Now all I need is about 3,000 of them because of the risk involved in the amount of activity going on in the Arctic. So hopefully what I've been able to do here is tie the operational challenges that I see to continuing research needs. So I started with those operational challenges, and let me summarize with, not bad for a flag officer, huh? With our research priorities. And I'm absolutely pandering to the crowd by putting hydrography first. But as I mentioned before, it's extremely important to prevent bad things from happening in the first place. And then I think I've talked about all of these in my earlier comments. So let me close by first thanking you for the opportunity to come and speak. The Coast Guard actually has a pretty rich history here in Alaska. We have some great partnerships with NOAA, with BOEM, with tribal leaders, with some of the academic University of Alaska, Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Southeast as examples. We've actually been operating in Alaska and in the Arctic for 150 years now. This is our 150-year anniversary. We brought the first federal officials to Sitka when the U.S. took over administration of this area from the Russians. We did our first Arctic patrol in 1867, 150 years ago now. And the good news is we've come a long way in the past 150 years. We've still got a long way to go. But our ties to Alaska go very deep. So those of you who are visiting Alaska, one of the things that you have to try here is reindeer sausage. It's a local favorite. You can't go too far, too many restaurants without it being on the menu. When you have it, think about the United States Coast Guard, because believe it or not, the U.S. Coast Guard is responsible for importing reindeer to Alaska, amongst many other colorful contributions. And believe it or not, this goes back almost 150 years. When whalers were kind of ravaging, particularly Russian whalers were ravaging the seas around Alaska, the Alaska Native communities were impacted. And one of the ways that we prevented starvation was importing reindeer from Siberia on revenue cutters, which were the predecessors to the modern-day Coast Guard. So think about me at the next time you eat at a restaurant here. And then I'll end by saying, although we've made great strides, I think I've demonstrated we have a lot more work to do to be prepared to use Arctic waters in a way that is safe and secure and pays attention to our stewardship responsibilities. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Donna. Yeah, so the question was, am I familiar with the new capability Iridium is putting up in terms of tracking small vessels and communications and so forth? And I'm somewhat familiar with it. One of the challenges that we have with satellite AIS is the latency. In northern latitudes, a ship could be 8 hours before we receive the data from a satellite, and the new capability is reducing that latency to as little as about 20 minutes. And I hear that it's going to continue to decrease beyond that. And that is fantastic news in terms of safety. And so we're very much looking forward to that. There's other satellite capability, commercial and military, which is I think already planned and funded, which will allow us to communicate better. And so I'm glad that in the next 2 to 3 years, there's a lot more capability going up in polar orbits that will allow us to carry out our missions better. I'll offer, so interestingly enough, we're putting up some small sats. DHS is funding part of a payload of small satellites that are going up here in the not too distant future, and it's actually Coast Guard people who will monitor, establish the receiving station outside of Fairbanks and monitor those signals and provide them back to DHS for action. But that shows you how much value we place on the satellite, borne capability that's coming in the future. Yes, sir. Yeah, that's great. I'll give you 2 places that we kind of focus our research and development activity. We have our own research and development center in New London, or in Groton, Connecticut, and I believe it's in New London now. We moved not too long ago, and they're a great place to connect to see what how they prioritize those research needs or the technology needs, and then we also have relationships with a variety of academic institutions. Primarily through the Department of Homeland Security, but they're fully funded. We have one, as an example, through University of Alaska Anchorage. They have a partnership with Fairbanks, and they're funding a variety of different research programs that are trying to get after exactly this list of challenges. So those are probably the 2 best places, and I can give you a card if you'd like and help you get connected to either of those. Yes, sir. It is, absolutely. Operating in Alaska, you find that sometimes it's really tough to carry out your missions. It might be, summertime fog. It might be wintertime winds. It might be icing, essentially frozen fog that collects on rotor blades of helicopters, which is usually bad. And because we work at such great distances, the weather where you are launching from is going to be different than the weather where you're carrying out your mission, and the transit in between may be, yet a third, different environment that you're going through. And so we don't launch a mission without knowing our weather at the current time and what it's going to be predicted to be throughout an entire evolution. And an evolution may last, an extended search and rescue may last 3 or 4 days. And so the more accurate that information, the better our decision making, and the lower our risk to us, to our air crews, and to the people that we're trying to serve in carrying out these missions. Now that also follows true or rings true for oil spill response. As an example, there was a study done a couple of years ago in the Aleutian Islands about responding to oil spills off the Aleutians. I mentioned the Aleutians is where that kind of superhighway of traffic between the U.S. West Coast and the Far East goes. They came to the conclusion that because of the challenging weather conditions there, only about 30% of the time can you use mechanical oil spill removal devices. which are typically the devices of choice in most other places around the United States. Only 30% of the time are they effective here. And so, having good weather forecasts to identify how we're going to approach our operations, how we're going to adapt our operations is extremely important to us. Sign me up. Yes, I would. Okay, well, hopefully I've set the stage for some of your excellent follow-on sessions here, and I'll be here for a little while. I'm interested in seeing the VTC hookup and then the panel members speak. So thank you again, and I'm available if you have any further questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, moving on. Next, the moderator for this afternoon's session is Charlie Alexander, Chief Planning and Performance Management Division for NOAA's Office, Maritime and Aviation Operations. In this capacity, Charlie leads strategic and operational planning and provides governance and support for enterprise-level performance measures. He represents OMAO and the NOAA Observing Systems Council, the Interagency Working Group on Facilities and Infrastructure, and on all NOAA-level strategic and operational planning. He's also deeply involved in the recapitalization of the NOAA ship fleets. Okay, Charlie.
Good afternoon. How you doing? We're going to have some fun, and we're going to get right to it. I really want to thank Admiral McAllister. You know, your challenges are our challenges. That was fantastic. Not only did I learn a lot in a short amount of time, but you laid a great foundation for what's coming next. So here's what I want you to think about, and then I'm going to open up this session. We're about to have a conversation with one of the NOAA ships, the Okeanos Explorer. You're going to have a conversation with that ship. It's going to be up on the screen shortly. We have a live feed to the ship. And this is going to be cool. This is part one of a two-part afternoon following Admiral McAllister's remarks. And we're first going to talk to the ship, and then we're going to have a panel discussion. They're both interactive, and we're just really glad to have you here. It's fun to be up here to sort of facilitate it. A logistical issue per these screens. We have a few PowerPoints that are going to sort of orient you to what we're going to do. The live screen with the people on it who are going to be talking to us with a short delay, 4 or 5 seconds maybe. There are limits to technology. Is going to be over here. So if you want, I know the way the doors are situated and the way people think, a lot of you are sitting on this side. And if you want to migrate over here, you'll have a better view of the people you're going to be talking to, okay? Just so you know. These guys are going to set it up right away, I suppose, and I'm going to set some opening remarks, and then we're going to introduce you to the people on the Okeanos Explorer. So the IWGFI, that's sort of another part of our wonderful bureaucracy, but that is where basically the federal government comes together to talk about the oceanographic fleet. And one of the things that we've been talking about the past few years are the challenges that we're going to get into this afternoon. And the vision to bring this to the Marine Technology Society meeting is to sort of deploy this discussion more publicly with folks like you. So that's what this afternoon is about. We'll start it with this fun exchange that we're going to have with the Okeanos Explorer. And then John White is going to facilitate a panel discussion up here with 5 distinguished panelists to talk about some of these challenges. And the idea is to keep this discussion in the MTS meetings for at least the next 4 or 5 years. So that's what we're starting today. When we talk to the Okeanos, at least the dictionary says telepresence is this sensation of being elsewhere, right? Virtual reality, the kind of stuff my kids like to play around with. Well, it's not quite like that. This is really a satellite technology hookup that'll transmit data and video in real time. And that's what you're going to see, real time with a 4 or 5 second delay. So have some patience on that. You might be hearing the person speaking before you see their lips actually move, but it's still going to work. One of the key things that they'll talk about is how this enables remote collaboration for the science they're doing on this ship. So, is technology letting us down? Sort of predictable sometimes. They're on the phone. They're trying to make this work. So, thanks for indulging us. We knew this might happen, and I'm the one up here who's going to entertain you while we get this working. Okay, yay. Now we have some slides which we're going to put up on this side to get you oriented to what the ship looks like and where it is in the Pacific, north of the Hawaiian Islands. Stephen, we ready to go? Okay. So my partner on the Okeanos, who's going to be leading their end of the discussion, is Casey Cantwell, and she's going to get you basically oriented to where the ship is, to who the participants are on deck who are going to talk to you, the expedition that's underway and their current operations. I have some questions that I'll queue up perhaps from here, but what I'd rather do as soon as we get talking to them is have you engage. I don't think you want me up here just asking them questions. I bet you've got all kinds of questions. I sure hope you do. So please queue up your questions, and when I take it to you, raise your hand and speak loudly, or I'll relay it from here and we'll have a conversation with these guys. They've got a really cool job. And Casey, are you ready to talk to us?
Yep. Hello. My name is Casey Cantwell. I work for NOAA's Office of Ocean Exploration and Research. Right now, I am joined by Commander Johnson. He is the commanding officer of NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer, and Mike White, also from NOAA's Office of Ocean Exploration and Research. So right now, you're viewing us in the control room of the Okeanos Explorer. We are currently in the middle of our Deep Sea Symphony expedition to explore the deep water habitats of the musician seamount. So, Charlie, I think that's pretty much a great way to start. We'd love to take some questions.
Who wants to go first? Sir. Casey, what's your mission? What are you guys up to?
So we are outside of the USEEZ. We're right now about 280 nautical miles just north of Hawaii, and are trying to document the deep sea habitat, just water. So in this case, today we are looking at a beached seamount, and it sits right on the border of the Prairie Fracture Zone. We are currently documenting both the benthic communities as well as the geologic setting to see what's down there and how it's interacting on deep water.
Next question.
Casey, what's the coolest thing you've seen in the last week?
Did you hear that, Casey? What's the coolest thing you've seen in the last week?
I can let question that we've seen in the last week. So this is your second ROV cruise. Probably had the best of the wonder still in you.
Well, I'm a marine biologist by education as well, so seeing all the cool stuff on the bottom, sometimes I'm not work done in my office, TV on, so I regularly have to turn it off to make sure I'm done. And there's really no one thing, it's just everything we're finding is really cool, from all the different types of corals that we've seen, sea slugs, sea cucumbers, and to the fish, and then sharks in the middle water on the way back up, which I really love, actually, by the way. Big sharks, charismatic megafauna are some of my favorite things. So that's probably it.
Okay. I second everything you just said.
So just so you know, for your awareness, we're not, the video's going in and out. That's fine. We can hear the audio great, so we're just going to keep going. By the way, for the folks in the audience, we have the map up there on to my left, and that shows you where these guys are located right now. And again, I have plenty of questions if you're shy, but how about another question? Who wants to go next? John.
Yes, can you talk about some of the audiences that you've been able to interact with via this telepresence over the last month or so?
So, Casey, can you tell us, or anyone, that Casey is there, and well, the other people who we can't see right now, but who are the other people you've been talking to, the other audiences that you're using telepresence to engage with?
So throughout the last couple of years, we have been working in the Pacific, both Central and Western Pacific, as part of our campaign Capstone, where we've been exploring the deepwater habitats of our nation's marine protected areas and national marine monuments. So with each of those expeditions, we engage the local stakeholders of those communities. We also have been engaging marine national monuments managers, as well as other federal agencies and the academic science community. Depending on the mission, it depends on the exact group that we work with, but telepresence technology gives us the opportunity to pretty much work with an endless supply of scientists on shore. So whether it's scientists connecting from all over the world, like today we have scientists joining us from Japan and Russia, as well as at least 4 states in the U.S., and we've had numbers that far exceed that depending on the mission. Or actually, one of my favorite stories about the power of telepresence, I'd like Mike to tell us about telepresence mapping.
Sure. So in addition to the telepresence ROV side that you're seeing right now, the images behind me, one of the things the ship is capable of is engaging folks on shore during our mapping cruises. We have a high enough bandwidth connection to our VSAT and satellites to the ECC's Exploration Command Centers on shore, where we can transmit all of our mapping data, some of the screens which you see before you, on shore, where it can be processed on shore.
Thanks. Another question? Anybody? Sir. Sure. So the question for any one of the three of you, can you describe the technical challenges involved in a mission in a deep water area like where you are?
Sure. Theo, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a wide variety of challenges doing this type of work at sea, from just keeping a machine of the size and scope of a ship running with as many people on board, to the telepresence, to the electronics that we have to keep running, and the bandwidth, as you can see, issues at times that we have, and down to the people too. You know, keeping people happy and keeping people healthy is super important. And my job as CEO is to juggle all of these things along with the wealth and the intent of the mission that we're out here to do, keeping people safe and still get the scientific, data that we're trying to find. So we have Mother Nature is always a big factor involved in any challenge that we do have, and there's days where we can't do our work because of the wind and the seas and things like that. And at times there's times we're going to have to run from Mother Nature as well to keep it safe, and that impacts our mission greatly at times. But technically, it's a lot of electronic, especially as we move forward in this electronic age, is keeping bandwidth up and running is a big deal.
Next question. I have one. This is probably for Commander Johnson. You left your home port in Rhode Island in 2015, and you've been in the Pacific since then. Can you give us an overview of the kind of missions and operations you've been conducting?
Well, I've only been on board the ship since July, but I can tell you I understand the things that they've done. The foreign ports they've been to, working all over the Pacific Basin, from Indonesia to Samoa, and all of the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. It's a really wide area with a lot of different things you have to do in different places, whether it's customs you have to deal with in Samoa, or politics you have to deal with as you go through these different EEZs. to do the work that we're doing, to repairing the ship in a foreign port that's 3,000 miles away from any place you can get a part. There's just a wide variety of things that the ship has done, and I am only kind of catching up to all of the enormity of it, but it is an amazing feat that has been going on here out in the Pacific for several years now, and we're trying to kind of answer this cruise definitely to look back at all the work and the findings that have been accomplished.
Thanks. Anybody else? Question about the mission, technology, crew? So my turn again. So Capstone, what you're doing right now, this is for any one of the three of you, is related, I presume, to Capstone. Can you tell us a little bit about that, the scope of that 3-year mission?
Sure. So Capstone is the campaign to address Pacific monument science, technology, and ocean needs. And this has really been a cross-nodal partnership from the Office of Ocean Exploration and Research and the ship, the Okeanos Explorer and OMAO, to our partners at NIMS and NOS. And it's been a joint effort that has led us to all of the remote marine protected areas and marine national monuments that are in our within the U.S. jurisdiction, and has also let us partner with several international partners as well. So we've done some work in the Marianas Trench, which has included work actually in the trench, as well as back arc, looking at hydrothermal vents and deep sea coral communities. Then we've also been down to American Samoa and looked at Rose Atoll Marine National Monument and characterized some of the benthic habitats within the monuments and just outside. And then just most recently, we wrapped up an expedition to Johnston Atoll, and we were both mapping as well as conducting ROV expeditions and documented several high-density deep sea coral communities. Our current mission is focused on documenting both geologic history of these seamounts, the Pacific seamounts that run just northwest of Hawaii, and looking for deep sea coral communities. So far, which we've been fairly successful at this cruise, which has been a huge highlight for us.
Hands? Sir. Are you using the ROV to collect any animals from the bottom?
We are. We typically try and collect about 4 to 6 samples during every mission, during every dive, and sometimes we'll have between 20 and 23 dives during a mission. And we focus our sampling operations on taking voucher specimens of rare or unusual fauna because we're a program of exploration. We're not exactly sure what we will find every time that we're down there. So we do limited sampling both of biological specimen as well as rocks.
Sir. So we know your mission is exploratory generally. Is the work you're doing now, this mission at the Musician Seamounts, is this to set a baseline for future investigations?
Mike, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. So one of the things we do when we're out here, and of course as the only publicly funded and totally dedicated ship to ocean exploration, all of our data becomes publicly available. The mapping data, the ROV video data, any data that we collect on the ship becomes publicly available for anybody who wants to use it. We consider ourselves nonpartisan, authoritative scientific data collectors and providers. So all the data that you're seeing here, the data that we're currently collecting in the Musician Seamounts, the data that we've collected throughout the Pacific Marine Monuments, the data we've collected throughout the international waters in the Pacific, all that data becomes available. And as Casey just mentioned, a lot of the areas we've been to, we have been the first of its kind ship to go in those areas with our adaptability and our range of capabilities, technologically speaking, between the ROVs, our ship systems, our mapping systems, to collect that data. All of that data will serve as baseline data for those to use in the future, whatever their needs might be.
So can, and there might be a couple other questions here, but we're looking, well, it's not up yet. I was going to ask you what we're looking at, but we're not looking at anything right now. So question, were you guys listening in to Admiral McAllister's remarks?
No, unfortunately we weren't. We've been focused on today's operations on the ship, and we're just taking a small break from them before we get back to work.
Okay, that's fine, because I know we're interrupting your work right now. I was going to see if you had been listening in, if you wanted to tie some things together. I'm sure I could do that, but I don't think that's very useful right now. More questions? Somebody else got a question about what these guys are doing right now? Sir. Education outreach. So Captain Bridgman is sitting here with us, and he has a question for you about your education and outreach.
So all of the data that you're seeing right now brought to you on the live video feed, as Mike mentioned, is publicly available. So we not only are a scientific program going out and collecting exploration data, we're also transmitting it live shore. So that offers a really unique opportunity to share the deep ocean, especially some of these really remote areas, and we can share that with the public in real time. So typically around the world you can see any of our video images from the ROV, like right now, or when we're mapping. You can see mapping data collection in real time, and that takes about 30 seconds to get anywhere in the world, depending on your internet speed. Beyond that, the Office of Ocean Exploration. One second. So the Office also has an education, which provides free lesson plans that go with missions, and everything is available on our website, oceanexplorer.com. And then when we come into port and in those areas, so for example, about what we have planned when we come in.
Yeah, at the end of this leg, we are doing a joint effort with the University of Hawaii, the Schmidt Ocean Institute, and the EX-OMAO to celebrate all the things that we have done in the past 3 years. At the UH Piers in Hawaii, there'll be public tours of both vessels, showing the work, how they work, what they look like on the inside to the general public, and there will be a tent. The program has been going to be putting together with other partners, local, that will be sharing some more of the discoveries in a way that the public is more easily available to see them. So it's going to be pretty cool. It's an all-day thing, and we're looking forward to. I love telling the public about what we do because our job's pretty awesome.
Thanks. We are looking at you. You can't see us, but we're looking at you. Mostly it's a static picture. There isn't a whole lot of movement, but that's fine. We can hear you fine. I have another question, but somebody else does. So yes, ma'am. So we have someone here who wants to get on board with you. The question is about bringing external people, educators, onto the ship. Of course, we have, and I'm sure Captain Bridgman would be happy to say a couple words about the Teacher at Sea program on our NOAA ships. But the question is really for the Okeanos specifically. Do you recruit other people to join you on these missions, like educators who can then, bring the sort of results and the messaging back into a different community?
Mike, would you mind telling them about the Explorer and Training Program?
Absolutely. So one of the things our office, the Office of Exploration and Research, hosts what we call our Explorer and Training Program, or our EIT program. This is where we invite senior level college students, graduate students, young career scientists out to the ship with us, or to one of our ECCs, our UNH, University of New Hampshire EEC. And when they're out here, we train them on all of our ship mapping and survey systems, including some of the screens you see for me, our multi-beam, single-beam, sub-bottom, as well as our hydrographic processing software, as well as our backscatter mosaicing. And these folks come from all across the country. Lately, we've had several individuals from North America and Samoa, and many individuals from Hawaii. We always like getting our local partners engaged. And when they come out here, they learn all of our systems, and then, of course, they bring all of that knowledge home to them, to their home institutions, to their home communities, to spread not only awareness about ocean exploration, but to share the real, very hard technical expertise that they learn on shore on the boat. We have one of our explorers in training who is just actually sitting at the UNH ECC last cruise using our telepresence capabilities to process data on shore, and she will present, hopefully, she just put an abstract into the Ocean Sciences meeting in, I believe it's February. And so as a small example, she'll be sharing her expertise that she learned here on the ship. So yeah, we are engaging not only, of course, the Teacher at Sea program. Certainly we'll have some VIPs out here, but through our Explorer and Training program, we're providing the skills and awareness about the ocean exploration community here.
Excellent. Thanks. Other questions? You folks way over there, you got a question? No? I got a question. Downstairs at the NOAA booth, and a little bit before we started this session, there's, you're broadcasting live now. Not the cameras aren't on you, but there's video that's streaming and other information about your mission. And even though we're not looking at that right now, can you describe what that is?
So what you're seeing right now at the booth, which is hosted by Mike Walker, is the video that's coming from our ROV. So we have two ROVs on board. One is ROV Deep Discover, and the other one is ROV Sirius. The two work in tandem. They are 6,000 meters rated, and they fly one above the other, one providing situational awareness and scale, and the other one really getting nice close-in views of the seafloor. So what you see on our website, what you see at the booth, and part of what you're viewing right now is live video that comes from them. So if you look directly behind us, you can see Sirius is looking at D2 directly off of Mike's shoulder, and just behind CO and I, you see an anemone that is the view from ROV Sirius.
Cool.
And during non-ROV hours, we are looking at the mapping acquisition.
Our team here is trying to bring some of that up. There it is. Excellent.
There we go. So one of our capabilities on the ship is of course, ocean exploration, but really we're exploring at a lot of different scales. This ship, with our science and technology capabilities, can go into an area. Overnight, we can map an entire seamount, so hundreds of square miles mapped overnight. We can then take that data, process that data on board, turn it over to the ROV team. They can dive on that data the following day with our ROVs, get the high-resolution video you're seeing right now on shore by the booth, posted by Mike Walker. In addition to the high-resolution video we use to document and characterize the seafloor, we are also taking samples. Those samples then get sent on to our partners to be processed genetically and geologically. So not only can this ship explore on hundreds of miles, but we can explore on the micro level. So we can do all sorts of site characterization all within a 24-hour period.
Pretty impressive. I have one more question, and then I'm going to do a time check. And I'm going to ask my question unless someone wants to jump in front of me. So my question is about archaeological or cultural heritage sites. There you are. You guys are actually, we can see you moving around. We got a live picture. Yeah, that's pretty good. That's about as good as it's gotten since we started. So it's nice looking at you. Hi. I'm waving at you. So, are you doing any investigations on cultural or archaeological sites on this mission?
Absolutely. So one of the things we're going to be hoping to do at the end of this mission, so stay tuned, is going to be doing some dives on some underwater cultural heritage sites, or UCH sites. I don't want to disclose what they're going to be yet because it's exploration and we're going to explore them. But on our way out, and some previous cruises before that, we collected data here on the ship to hopefully find and characterize some positions of some underwater cultural heritage sites. We have some unique software on board that can help us do it, some software from UH. And through, of course, the use of telepresence, we're able to take that data, work with our partners on shore who are more experienced in the archaeological side of things, and we're able to engage them through telepresence and say, okay, here was the data we collected, here's what we're seeing on the ship based on your knowledge, based on your expertise, okay, through telepresence. What do you guys see? What do you folks on shore, what are we thinking this could be? And so we have identified a few targets that at the end of this cruise we're going to attempt to dive on to try and characterize what they're going to be. So, that's sort of an example that's happening right now of here on the ship, our fleet of technological capabilities supported by the crew and officers. We collected data. We can then take that data, turn it over onshore through our telepresence capabilities, and then the folks on shore using their expertise can go back to us and say, okay, here's what we think and here's where we should be targeting. This not only speaks about the technological and adaptiveness of the folks on board, but, of course, the entire system working as a unit itself, really efficient. We can do this in a couple of days.
Okay, excellent. And I got to tell you, I had a question queued up here, something ridiculous like, do you like your jobs? But we're looking at your smiling faces, and it's pretty clear to me, at least, that you like your jobs and you know you have cool jobs. What's also kind of special right now is the video clarity of what we're looking at. This is the best in the 30 minutes or so we spent with you, and it's cool that happened towards the end so that we can all look at you. I'm going to go to wrap up in a second. I'm going to ask the audience if they have any other questions that you want to ask the crew on the Okeanos. No? Yes, I have one. Yes, sir. So the question is, and I think we've been looking at some of them, but I'll toss it to them. So are you showing us, have you pictures, live pictures from the ROV? Was that the question?
Yep. Directly over our shoulders is the live video feed on the ship. So if you look, you can see we are exploring the seafloor at Leashed Seamount. So behind Mike's shoulder is the view from Sirius. You can kind of get an idea of the geologic setting. And you can find that video on video feed 2 on our website. And behind CO and I, you have the seafloor from ROV Deep Discoverer. And you can find that on video feed 1 on oceanexplorer.noaa.gov.
So if you have a cell phone, never mind a computer, you have access to all of that right now. And it's streaming
Absolutely.
At the booth downstairs if you want to see it on a screen. Maybe not quite this big, but you can get a good look at what they're doing. So I'm going to call that the last question. I'm going to come back to you three and see if you want to say any closing remarks. I wish you could see us. There's a lot of smiling faces in this room. It's just the coolest. You're thousands of miles away, and we're able to look right at you. It's pretty neat. So you want to say anything in closing?
Sure, Theo, you'd like to start?
Yeah, sure. I'd just like to say thank you for letting us take this opportunity to share the work that we're doing out here. As you said, you can see our smiles. I like to say I have a pretty awesome job. I may not like every day, but I know I like a lot more days than most people do. And the view out my office window is pretty radical compared to most. So yeah, thank you for letting us take this time to talk, and we're glad to answer more questions if you have them. If you'd like to forward them, I'm sure Charlie can get you my email or Casey's or Mike's if there's more things you'd like to find out.
Mike?
And I'll just piggyback onto that. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for letting us answer your questions. If you have any additional questions that CEO mentioned, please forward them on to us. I just want to say, other than the fact that we get to be out here doing ocean exploration, one of the wonderful things about being on this ship is the teamwork and camaraderie. We're supported by an excellent officer corps. We're supported by an excellent crew. And as a missions team, none of what you're seeing around us would be possible without that personnel and support. So love being part of a team out here. Just an excellent experience on this ship.
I would second everything that these two gentlemen just said, and I'd like to throw my thanks also to Stephen Barry, who organized this whole thing and brought this opportunity to us. So thank you so much for having us today.
Awesome. So I have a few thank yous too, and then I'll wrap up. Of course, from all of us here in the room, a huge thanks to all of you, to Casey and Michael and Eric. Also to the event support that we got from Katie Wagner and Roland Bryan, the MTF's IT staff, these guys over here who helped make that smooth ride today, or as smooth as it could be, thanks to you. And thanks to the people who had the vision to put this into this session, and that's Lieutenant Commander Stephen Barry over there and MTS Executive Director Kevin Traver, and also from MTS, Nicole Boland and Kevin Sly. They all did a great job bringing this to you today, and really appreciate you sort of savoring this moment with us. It's been a lot of fun. So I'll be back at the end of the next session with Kevin Traver for a couple of closing remarks. Please come back to this room at 3:30, where John White is going to facilitate a panel discussion which is going to elaborate on the kinds of challenges that Admiral McAllister talked about to open the session. And there's plenty of stuff to talk about. So I look forward to seeing you back here in about 15 minutes. And thanks, everybody. How about a hand for the Okeanos crew?
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye. Man, that is just so cool.